Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We are proceeding with the panel discussion. And due to the fact that on the stage we have great people who will express great ideas, we call this event the Great Debate. Let me introduce the people from the left to the right. On the right-hand side of the table, Professor Fred Roberts, Director of Command, Control and Interoperability Center for Advanced Data Analysis of the Rutgers University in the United States. And next to him is Dr. Heidi Hartmann, Executive Director of the National Council for Science. Heidi has joined South Africa. Next to her is Farah Tarat, the chair of this conference, and Director General and Chief Scientist of the National Institute of Applied Systems Analysis. Next to him is leader of Russian Earth Sciences, Academician Secretary of Earth Science Division of Russian Academy of Sciences, member of the Presidium of Russian Academy of Sciences, Academician, Scientific. On the left-hand side of Alexander is Miara. Miara is program manager for Solid at the Earth Observation Directorate of Innovation, Application and Science of CNES, Centre National d'Études Spatiales, это французское космическое агентство. Miara также, she's also Secretary General of the International Association of Geomagnetism and Astronomy. And finally, I introduce you famous researcher of Arctic, well-known geologist, president of International Committee on Data for Science and Technology called Data, professor of geology in the University of Edinburgh, Jeffrey Pott, who represents I hope that we will have an encouraging 50-60 minutes discussion. We will organize it in the following way. First, we proceed with 40 minutes questions to the panelists. I will raise those questions. And then the questions will be all open for the whole audience. So, let me then start with the items that follow up what was discussed and presented at the conference. And it will be focused on systems analysis of data and data by itself. Let me ask Alexander the first question. what are the estimates of the present day balance between data growth and adequate systems analysis method for their processing, thus making them useful? How do you see from the point of view of the scientists who work in geology and geophysics?
You know, I had time to think about this, your question. And I think that, you know, it's, in many aspects, has a philosophical part. You know, if there are some methods which are not useful, which methods which are not useful, so it means that this methods should be included from our discussion. Yes? So we discuss only methods which should be useful. And the main instrument in any methods of data analysis and interpretation is the solution of system of linear equation. And as I know from our implementation, that now it's possible to solve the system of linear equation as the mark of equation 10 to 16 they talk. So 10 to 16 is a very large number. So it means that if it is possible, so there is no problem from the point of view of application of already existing methods. If so.
Yes. Thank you. Then the same question I would like to address to Fred or to India. So the question is, what are the estimates on present day balance between the data growth and adequate methods? How methods of systems analysis are useful?
So I wish I could give a similar philosophical answer. So we know that the amount of data that we have nowadays is overwhelming. And in fact, sometimes it's better to have less data than to have more, because we spend too much time trying to figure out how much data we have. And I think that the methods have to catch up, but the problem is that the amount of data we have is growing so rapidly that I'm kind of skeptical that we'll catch up. I think what we have to do is develop tools for picking and choosing the data that's relevant for the problem that we need to solve. And this is really a big challenge because there is so much data you don't know what to choose. In fact, in some areas of science, for instance, astrophysics, the data comes by us with only one chance to decide what is relevant and what's not, what we can save. So somebody has to decide on methods for figuring out what data is relevant, and often not knowing what the hypotheses are that you want to test. Right? So the big challenge really is to we'll have more and more opportunity to gather data, but the big challenge is to find methods for figuring out what of the data is relevant and how to choose.
Thank you. That's good observation. So this is the question which is scientific by itself. So, Paolo, can you comment on the present balance between the development of the data themselves and system analysis?
Thank you. I'm going to take perhaps surprising perspective because, of course, we all talk about data crisis and, for example, hydrology has been witnessing loss of those data. But I will take a different perspective. From the field I know rather well is in the World Climate Research Program, and we started the so-called GDEX, which is the global regional experiment where we work with a lot of satellite data. And I think some of my colleagues will remember the eruption of this space segment, which we have seen over the last 15 years, where basically every self-respecting agency or country needs to have a satellite. And this big effort, we try to balance out with the ground data. So what I'm saying is that we have a problem with this, let's call it geopolitically skewed focus on data. Because I have statistics from the European Space Agency and from NASA and from Jackson. 1% of the raw data is being used for analysis and for purposes of some operations. 99% of the data is not used. So I think we need some balance there. We need some balance there in terms of resources and attention to the analysis, to the algorithm, and not just for the hardware and software but data. The result of it is actually self-fulfilling prophecy. Let me give you an example. At current, if you go to the website of these agencies, you can download 27 products on a week, reflectively. Basic parameter which we all need to do basic memory. 27 different algorithms for one region in the world. So what would you do? So there is a science of big data, crowdsourcing, GeoVector, which is trying to correct these 27 products by crowdsourcing. So we are generating additional work to ourselves based on this alignment between the focus on the analysis and the investment going through the data. So actually I'm calling for less data efforts and more efforts, more funding for the analysis of the data and the accounting.
Thank you very much. Continuing that question, can I ask the panel? Big data that was presented to the talk of fact products. Is it an achievement or is it another step to make life more complicated? Do we need this big data? Or is it better to be focused on the less amount of data that arrive not so rapidly and to have time to think? Jeffrey?
Well, all this data is there. It's being produced at an increasing rate. If you imply, let's say, that somehow science should turn their back on this data, it's a bit like trying to disinvent scientific discoveries. It's there, and there are many domains in which it's useful. One thing we should be careful about there is that the choice of projects that you undertake, or the choice of problems that you attempt to address, should relate to two things. How important are they, and how practical, how doable are they? I think there are a lot of issues in this domain, however, that need to be resolved. As has been said, the rate at which data is being produced is far greater than the rate at which it's being used. The gap between data production and data use is clearly getting bigger. But it's useful, I think, to think of the deficits. What makes it difficult to use that data properly? My first deficit would be in statistical methods. Far too many people are utilizing classical methods often based on simple or complex regression theories. And it's quite inadequate for much of the complex data that's now produced. Increasingly, we need to use topological-based statistics. It's one of the reasons I think that data-intensive science is just bad. Simple statistics aren't good enough. A second deficit is all the data that all the methods we're not using. And one of the big opportunities at the moment relates to linked data, the so-called semantic web, whereby by combining and integrating data from different sources and the same phenomenon, we can get a much deeper understanding. But if we're going to do that, individual disciplines have to do something that is rather difficult and rather tedious. They have to create the sort of vocabularies and grammars that are needed to utilize that data effectively. And there are not many fields of science which have done that. And one of the great leaders in my view is the field of bioinformatics. The genetic protocols some 20 years ago, the whole bioinformatics community, genomics community, agreed that they would instantaneously release that data for each other. Doing that has been a means whereby they've been able to delve into the meaning of this complex data. Another area of deficit, something that we should be using more, is the so-called Internet of Things. As I say, pretty much any device with its own power source can collect non-trivial data. And I was talking to a senior man in Google some weeks ago, and his comment was, we probably use much less than 1%. Much less than 1% of that is crystallized into information. And the potential of that data is enormous, particularly, I would say, for social scientists.
social sciences. So I think we should regard this great data revolution as just another resource. We shouldn't discriminate against it, and we shouldn't foolishly follow it for no good reason. It's there, it's going to grow, and I think government challenge is somehow trying to control it so we understand what's happening when we're using data, which comes back to statistics.
Thank you, Jeffrey. What are your impressions?
I think I will go on the same line as Pavel from the space agencies. The huge amount of data now is coming from space. Copernicus program, which is a European program, and at the end of this year, the only samples in space, so not all the program fully operating by the end of the year, will produce 6 terabytes of data per day. So this is something. What we are going to do with this data, what is important, I think it's not to have access only to raw data, but to have also access to products. And it's really, really important to have data and services. I think this is something we have to think about, and in France, MS really support developing such data and service at national level for 4 domains, for the earth, atmosphere, ocean, and land. So the idea is really to go a little bit one step further and to provide to those interested in data and services. And of course, behind services, there are scientists, and we have to apply the method to this huge amount of data.
Thank you, Diana. Amy, you work in social sciences. What do you think about the data in social sciences?
I think the point has been made that this is a lot of the data that is collected, a lot of big data that is around, and it's not necessarily available to social sciences. It's data about social systems, economic systems, cultural systems. And so I think the full integration of the social sciences in the open data is it's fundamental to the ability of social sciences to contribute effectively to our attempts to ensure that science contributes solutions to some of the problems.
Thank you very much. Pavel, what are the major spheres of resistance analysis development in the 21st century? Will it make new science? Will something principally change compared to the 20th century when it was started in the institute?
If I had an answer to that, I probably would be very happy man to know how this would go, because of course we have such a speed of change at the same time. I could give different platforms where I would give one point a little bit on the previous comment about how. As you know, I'm a natural scientist, physical scientist, mathematician, biologist, all of that. And I've seen a eruption of this field over the last 70 years. We've been able to do things which we could only dream of. We use, for example, all possible techniques to measure large regions. So this big experiment we did in France, in South, in Amazon, terabytes of data. We have developed models which I've shown some of them in my presentation. We have entered the science policy dialogue. We are producing these numbers from General Assembly. Yes, this afternoon I had a conversation with my colleague in New York who is speaking as we speak now to the heads of states meeting to check on the progress of the development goals. Yet, I'm becoming skeptical every week, every day, because we are not making enough miles, as we say in English, in implementing all the big ambitions in the transition to the sustainable world. Why we are, I think because there is a misbalance in the system thinking between the natural science and social science. I believe that the social science, in the broadest sense of the meaning of social science, not only the economy and macroeconomy, but also behavior, consumer behavior, psychology, human condition, This is what will make a difference. So I believe that the key element of the 21st century of the system sciences, the real marriage between this field of the social sciences and the natural science, to understand how institutions, how governments, how democracies, how citizens, how human rights actually reflect on this change. This is the moment. So I would like to see by 2030 or by 2100. If you ask, for example, at least half of this is focused into the transformation of system, which are the soft part of the system.
Fred, do you think that systems analysis in the 21st century will go in direction of development as mathematical discipline, or not really? Or it will be rather, another Google system, or that will be a Pokemon Go game, or whatever it will be?
So I'm not a very good fortune teller. It strikes me that the direction that the systems analysis is going is the same direction that a lot of areas of science are going nowadays. And that is that we're able to address problems that cross disciplines. And so many of the most important problems facing society are multidisciplinary in nature. Certainly the themes we talked about at this meeting, the natural disasters, involve multiple disciplines. That's also true of healthcare, academics, and it's true of climate changing, and it's true of poverty, and so on and so forth. So I think fundamentally, the way I see systems analysis going, if it wants to address the most important problems of our society, is to develop tools and techniques that cross disciplines, that involve natural sciences and social sciences, that involve mathematical tools to take advantage of the fact that we have lots of data that we can analyze. But fundamentally, this is the positive side of things. The negative side of things is that we can be so dependent upon the fact that we now have powerful machines and lots and lots of data that we can get lost and we can lose sight of what's really the most important. So there is a challenge for systems analysis to worry about whether it's really addressing the important problems and doing it in the right way.
If somebody has many helpers, many people under him who help him to do something, he does less himself. In the past, when computers were weak, mathematicians created a lot of sophisticated algorithmical approaches, mathematical approaches, how to calculate numerically differential equations. Once computer became stronger and stronger, that is not needed anymore. Do we have a danger that with the progress of computing system, with the progress of computers and networking systems, the brains will be decayed? What do you think about that?
This is perhaps my biggest worry, but in different context. This is my worry about big data, because we have seen it once. In the 80s, I mentioned it in my talk, and suddenly the climatologists could resolve the equations by supercomputers. We saw this eruption of very complex models which we have now. And frankly, if you ask me, we mean what they are doing only partially. So we lost control of the understanding of the system by the high power computing. This might happen again by using even more big data. But coming back to your question, are we becoming more stupid? There is a study which we started with the data from Germany, and we are getting now data from Holland, in which we look into the cognitive development of children, two cohorts, one between 1985 and 2009, which is the generation of being dependent all the time on these things, on doing only these things, and generation before. And the first signals are showing clear almost jump between the cognitive properties of the human brain when it comes to dependency and over-reliance on these standards. So I think this is a big danger of losing a little bit of the, and it's not a big sign, isn't it? Because if you don't train your brain, you're becoming more forgetting. So this is the thing which progress. So I think in both cases, my answer would be yes, we should be worried about it and look after this situation.
Alexander, what your approach?
I would like to return to the just previous maybe part of this question. You know that the modern economic science that operate with mathematics very well, so they solve very complicated equations. But really we have a very deep gap between the economic science and the real economics. And I do not know that could we think that we have a full system in which natural sciences, economic science, and the real economics are included. Maybe it's the main problem, how to create this system.
Hey,
Yes.
do you think that this way of development will satisfy the many national communities which are united by your Council of Science? The level of the development is very different.
Well, maybe from that perspective, Alexei, and following up on what some of the comments that have been made also about the importance of the interface between natural and social sciences. When we think about the development of systems analysis and literature research, we have to take seriously this context of a global agenda of major societal problems, but also society's increasing demands for science, not only to understand them, but to help solve them. And that agenda, of course, as exemplified by the Sustainable Development Goals, really it's been referred to as an integrated agenda in the sense that it combines the environmental, the social, economic dimensions of human development, so change, and it challenges us not only to tackle those societal problems that it identifies in interdisciplinary ways, but really to understand that we can't disentangle those problems necessarily, that there are interdependencies between them. So we still tend, I think, within both science and policy to deal with issues of poverty, inequality, conflicts, diseases, infectious diseases, epidemics, etc., as discrete systemic problems, disconnected from each other and from the major threats of global environmental change. And that's really where I think the Sustainable Development Goals framework challenges us to see these as an integrated package of problems. And that poses huge demands on, I think, on science, not only to strengthen the collaboration between scientific fields and the disciplines they represent, but between science and societal stakeholders. I think that the three critical interfaces in what Jeffrey this morning called the systems of systems approach are important. And the first one of those was the natural science, social science interface. If we don't get that one right, we won't necessarily be very good at getting the interface between science, policy, and practice right. And just one final comment, I agree with what Paul was saying about, you gave some indications about the type of social science that we need to bring into this. But I think a lot of that is happening, particularly in the sustainability research and global environmental change research community. But what really happens is that we take into account and fully integrate social science perspectives on the complexity, the non-linearity, and often irrationality of human development and human behavior, and the more subjective elements of values, attitudes, beliefs, and worldviews that determine how we see the system, how we respond, how we perceive risks, whose decision to determine responses, paths, and who determines the direction of change that we expect society to move into. And that really falls also on the humanities. So we mustn't forget the humanities community, I think, in this debate.
Thank you very much. A question to you, Joe. Computers were created to help people. Now they start more and more control in different fields. First, once you switch on your computer, he starts to ask questions. And every new version of Microsoft Office or similar Apple Macintosh system asks more and more questions. But you can't avoid it. You must answer the questions. Otherwise, you cannot refer. You can switch off many of them. This is one of the small examples. But computers start to control us in global, general way. We are in a point, our navigation system says that the server will send us as a taxi exactly in this point. We don't need to explain where we are and so on and so forth. Do you think, first, is it a good thing or bad thing? And second, how it will be developed further?
That question is a question which in English we call an old chestnut, which actually means it's been around for as long as people have been thinking and writing something down. I recall that Cicero, 2,000 years ago, argued that reading was bad thing because it destroyed your capacity to think independently. In a sense, I think what you're saying, suggesting the possibility, is that we might lose our individual autonomy to these devices which control us. Well, in the last 10,000 years, we've lost and voluntarily given up a great deal of autonomy. 9,000 years ago, when we were all of us in small hunter-gatherer groups, we lost our autonomy to the vicissitudes of climate, the vicissitudes of not finding a meal to eat this week. Now we lose a great deal of authority of our autonomy into the state which denies us the opportunity, the possibility of doing this or that. If we do it, they put us in jail. So how has the human spirit and the human brain coped with these things? I'm not aware that it is a tipping point has been reached where somehow a new technology, a new law, a new system of control has stopped thinking or being spirited human beings. So I think I put it in the category of an interesting old question. It's good to discuss around the bar with a glass of vodka, but it doesn't get you very far.
Viola, please.
Yeah, maybe we have to think somehow that we are in a situation of balance between well-being and privacy. We have all these possibilities around us, and our life really changes every single day, because every single day we have something new with this machine. But also, as you said, your GPS send the information around the world, and people know exactly where you are. So it's your privacy, which is somehow also to be possible. So I think it's something really to think about, and it's not a very easy question because we need all these well-being possibilities, but at the same time, I think we need also to be ourselves.
There are many people in this room who are people of the 20th century. For us, privacy is important. Do you think in the 21st century it will be so important for the people? Or they will have different habits, different ideas about them. Maybe they will be happy to be a part of the general system of computers that will do something What do you think?
Well, this is a complicated question. For myself, I think we need somehow to go back to our real roots. And for this, we need some time to escape in nature, to go away for this work. I don't know how many times you enjoy to go to your nature somewhere and to live maybe 1 week or 2 if it's possible without the internet and without telephone and just thinking. And I think this is really very nice to have a little bit of time of thinking by yourself.
What about you? What do you think?
I'm actually less optimistic than in general. I think we have shown to the world that the human race is very able to behave like ostrich, to stick the head in the sand and hope nothing will happen. If you look around how fast and how steep the gradient is for all the development in the information technology, in the communication technology, in the information overload, how we are lacking behind that being able to process it, what kind of processes we triggered over the last 15 years in the world because of that system. I don't know. I would bet 50-50 that we may be facing some kind of crisis in 2030's time, trying to reconcile that to the balance we should try to see between our own autonomous decisions and decisions which are being governed and prescribed and led by all those technologies which are emerging more and more. I think jury is still alive. I think never in the history such a thing happened, where the humans, were sitting in the system they created, actually being subject of the system rather than object.
Can you comment once again on that?
I think this is also one of those old chestnuts that's been around for as long as people have been around. I think almost every generation have thought that they are at the end of days. If you're a fundamentalist Christian in the USA, you believe that very strongly. There have always been cogent reasons for believing that. Possibly it's to do with human psychology that says, because I have arrived, this must be the culmination of human existence. And I'm highly skeptical that any one of those generations in the past has been right, but clearly they haven't been. And my question is, why should we be right in believing somehow this is the end? Maybe it's just a reflection of the same old problem that we always think that our generation is at the epitome of human evolutionary development.
Thank you very much for this optimistic view. Alexander.
So I do not know, but maybe because the next generation which will diminish the significance of big data. And maybe the way to be happy to have massive, yes. It may be the main idea of the next generation. What do you think?
No?
No.
Haley, would you like to comment on this?
Well, I was just going to say that you would get a very different answer from me as opposed to if my nephews who are in their late 20s were sitting here. So I think it's about the issue of privacy is also about our understanding of the norms of what and how we communicate. I'm struck often by having access to social media, which I share that access with my nephews, and very often I don't understand what they're talking about because they communicate in a different way to the way in which I communicate. And that means implications for them, I think, of also what they choose to share and how they understand their privacy is different.
Thank you very much.
Just to say one thing to Jeffrey. Jeffrey, I'm not a fatalist, but I'm control freak. So I want to be controlled for what I'm doing with the community.
Okay, next question is what data science will be in this century, in the first 21st century? Because of 3D, velocity, volume, and variety, there is a data revolution. So all three things are increasing logarithmically, I would say every month. Systems of observations are becoming tremendously distributed all over the world. Beforehand, in the first part of the 20th century, there was no data science. Data was just a work, just a job that people did for scientists to collect data and then provide. For that, ICSU used to have World Data Centers system. Now, data itself, registration of data, data acquisition, data storage, everything before data mining is becoming a sophisticated and very difficult science. So how you see the development of this science in future? Of course, I asked Jeffrey to answer that as the first thing.
Well, it's always a good technique to disagree with the chairman who is asking the questions. I mean, I think there's always been a data science in science. I mean, when I was a little boy, my first introduction to an interesting phenomenon was when my class of 30 pupils, and I was about 10 or 11, we were each given a measuring tape and asked to measure the distance from one point to another. And the distances we measured were all recorded. And of course, we all produced different measurements. And the question was, well, who was right? And how could we find who was right? And the teacher introduced us to ideas of averages. And of course, all measurements are subject to uncertainty. Well, pretty much all of them. Some of them are, I've got a little copy card here, which is a co-data committee. It's every 4 years recalculates the fundamental concepts of science. So Planck's constant we can give you to 31 decimal places, which is quite a lot, but still it's imprecise, that measure. I think one of the fundamental issues that we have to cope with in doing more complicated things with data is uncertainty. All our measurements are uncertain, all our relationships are uncertain, and one of the crucial things is if we do more complicated systems analysis, if you like, then how can we control uncertainty? The more complicated the experiment becomes, or the question becomes, and the larger number of degrees of freedom, the probability that chance intersections of phenomena will create massive consequences gets larger. And one of the real difficulties is how do we evaluate the probabilities in complicated systems. And sometimes, of course, we're very well aware when we put a complex system together, we may find that the statistical significance of our results is very low indeed. In other words, we have learned nothing from it apart from the exercise of putting the system together. And I think that's one of the crucial issues now when we deal with these complex data sets and subject to complex analyses, is how can we determine the degree of uncertainty associated with the results. And I think that's going to be a really significant problem, particularly as we lose the capacity as individuals to follow the manipulations that the machine has done for us. And I think that's one of the great problems that we've got, trying to establish what has gone on in the machine and how can we establish significance.
Fred, can you give us your impressions of that? What data science will be in the 21st century?
So I'd like to actually broaden the question, if I may. If we look at the development of computer science, more generally, I call data science a subfield in some sense of computer science. We went through stages where there was an interest in development of formal languages, and there was an interest in the development of new architectures, and so on and so forth. Nowadays, the hot area in computer science is the apps. What are these machines good for in terms of helping us? So those apps include quite dramatic changes in our lives that are either here or coming. So it includes driverless cars. which, if you can believe the statistics, maybe within 10 years it might be 20% of the cars on the road. In spite of the fact that sometimes they still have accidents, recently with Google, we'll have walls that will tell us they need to be painted, so we won't have to look. We'll have refrigerators that will tell us to order eggs because we're down to our last egg. We already have electronic navigation systems in our vessels, so that the current class of mariners no longer has to take paper charts and probably doesn't even know how to use them. So we've bought into this. We are letting these machines become our servants, but at the same time they're controlling us now. But this is the direction I think that computer science is going. And in the same way, I think it's the direction that data science is going as well too. Because people want this, that's what the demand is. So I think that data science is going to go in the direction of how can we develop tools and techniques that are going to, quote unquote, make our lives easier. Now, will they really make our lives easier? That was part of the earlier discussion. I think we can come back to that question.
Thank you very much. Alexander, please.
I would propose just a futuristic point of view for the future. It seems to me that, the human brain is so limited to operate with big data. So probably just in the future there will be some special people or some society of people who will operate with this big data. It may be in many aspects sacrifice people, but others will operate with significant data sets which will be provided by this society.
Do you mean that, like in the 19th century, the best people who were in the army, the best people who will be big data operations?
It's the same scenario as Alexander. I think nowadays the number of jobs like data analyst, data programmer, data scientist are really increasing. So it's really already named data something. And there are programs, masters in data analysis, and really it's a new market. And for sure, we have to take into account this as well.
Hayden, please.
Perhaps just to say again from an EXE perspective, but this is also from a data perspective, and indeed something that we're working jointly on is, for me, if I think about the question of the future of data science, what is really critical is to ensure that these developments and that the opportunities posed for science by the data revolution do not lead to a new global knowledge divide. And so what is really important is that we ensure that we're engaged in data science capacity development and mobilization in developing countries and regions of the world.
Please.
Let me just go back from the very futuristic to the very practical, I think very important, maybe very key aspect of this data science in the next century, next decennium, hopefully next years. This is what we represented this by core data. I think this famous paper you mentioned, I think Jeffrey used in his presentation, showing, and I repeat, that in the medical oncology trials and published papers in high-level journals, we can show that you construct, repeat back, what was it? 3 out of 20 or something, just started numbers. It's just striking. I think it's almost criminal if you look at this one. So I think that what we need to do first is to establish the balance between data publishing and the publishing. We need to provide a responsible quality control of data sets together with the results based on those. Because what is it about if you cannot reproduce the findings based on the same data, which is either not there or which is not given to the setting. So I think this is a challenge which is immediate, which is not in 2100, which is simply there tomorrow, and I would say it should be the key priority, changing minds of the full chain, of the scientists, of the incentives in the system, of the funders. But this is a big task for ICSU, for other parties, and I think it's a priority number one.
Thank you very much. You have the final comment. And then the panelists will be available for the questions from the audience.
Just to follow up Pamela's comment. A priority for Kyoto, reading from many other science groups, is to find new standards of reproducibility for a data-intensive age. That's a very easy thing to say, but much more difficult to deliver in practice. But it really is an absolutely fundamental priority. One of my concerns, given the paper to which I referred to this morning, is it could lead to an undermining of confidence in the very process of science itself. And so it's something that we have got to take care of. We've got to get out of the board. Something to be easy to us, but it's vitally important.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Following this line, I would like to invite everyone who is interested tomorrow morning for the data citation workshop organized with the corresponding task group of Cognita, and it will start at 9 o'clock in the room upstairs. Please ask any questions you want, not necessarily linked to what has been discussed. Jeffrey Lam from USGS.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I don't know if I'm asking this question too, but I just wanted to, I guess, advertise an issue that's important for my agency and the U.S. government, and it's probably important for other agencies and groups as well. And we're very interested and concerned about continuing our operations, and so one of the things that we are compelled to do is to better understand how our data are used. And it would be interesting to know if there's some way of monitoring how the data are used, and that is then in form of data. But also, I just want to point out that many of the people here are natural scientists. We have a little bit of social science as well, but it's I think important and interesting to understand how the engineered world interacts and interfaces with the natural world and sociology. In particular, I've been advocating for some ways of monitoring how engineered systems are used, and it would be interesting to know how, for example, the power grid is operated in the context of magnetic storms, or how it is that telecommunication systems are maintained in the context of a changing natural environment, how it is that airlines are flying their airplanes around, in the context of maybe a volcano. So there's a bunch of related issues there, which kind of straddle the boundaries here between academia and government, and it really gets into private industry. And it would be, I think, very interesting and important for society, like I say, to know how the engineered system and the interaction of people with the engineered system responds to the natural world.
Who would like to answer this question? You.
Well, I think currently this is an answer maybe nation by nation, country by country. I don't think we have really a global way of reacting such a problem. Maybe when a part of the world is in front of such a problem, maybe these nations are together in order to answer this. And I'm thinking just about magnetic storm and Scottish power, for example. You know very well that there is a link between scientists monitoring the magnetic field and engineers really involved in Scottish power. So there are some connections, but I think it's really an open door. We have to think about it. Yes, open door.
Jeffrey?
I'll answer your second question. It is part of it. Actually, Simon Hodson sitting with me is probably best Good, answer the first question you asked. Some years ago I was involved in a major study for UK government on the resilience of engineered systems. Because of Icelandic volcanic eruptions, because of electrical storms, because of incompetence, and so on. And one of the things that those people who looked at resilience of modern systems realized quite quickly is that most of that resilience depends on communication. You've got to be able to tell your head office, the local power station where you work. You've got to be able to say that this train is broken down, so the train behind shouldn't bump into it, and so on, and so on, and so on. We then went to a number of companies whose business is telecommunications, engineering, power stations, and so on. And we learned after a while that the first trick question we could ask them is, if the electricity grid went down, which would be the most resilient form of communication so they could keep in business? And none of them knew. They said, oh, the mobile phone, which is completely wrong. And I think what's happened in the last few years is that governments have a much greater, or many governments at least, have developed a much greater awareness of where resilience comes from. What's interesting is that if you compare resilience of modern systems with resilience of many systems 40 years ago, they were more resilient than modern ones. If you were a modern company, you had your own backup telephone system and your own backup generator. You didn't depend upon the national system, and so on. And most of that is gone because we're engineering to find out and find the limits. The stress tests are on weak compared to what they used to be. So it's something we have to look at very seriously. At which point my voice is going.
Other? Yes.
Two aspects. If you put NOAA and NASA budgets together, probably you know the budget as much as I do, and then to see how much money goes to the hardware development and everything associated, with respect to how much money goes to the developing products in the community. There is a factor of 1,000 more dollars goes to the space technology compared to what to do with these products. So I think first problem is the priority is in those who produce data, your agencies. Fund please more of the community which will develop the product. Second is happy story, the open access. I mean, somebody showed here how it was the example of Lancet, who very became free available and daily downloads went up from 60, I think, to like 6,000. So the open access combined with the quality assurance, quality control is perhaps the way how we used to be monitored. However, we know from the internet age that download doesn't mean use yet, so there is a right to pure download, some people download and leave it there. But I would say the first thing is important. I think we are really not interested enough in the users community around the product which we create.
Thank you very much. Other questions, please? Please, Simon Hudson, if I may, can I also address this question?
You want to also?
There's a material. Excuse me, Simon. Please try. I wanted to pick up on the power grid example because I think that's a very interesting one. Right. Certainly in the United States, the power grid has some built up haphazardly, and we've added things and expanded things, and I think it's fair to say we would never have built it the way it is now if we built it from scratch. It's not designed to run by supercomputers, but it is run by supercomputers. And is increasingly run with the analysis of data in order to refine the algorithms that look for what's normal and what's not normal. And you have to find anomalies and abnormalities very rapidly in order to avoid cascading effects that kind of lead to big blackouts. So for instance, we've learned the last time we had a huge blackout in the entire northeastern United States, I think it was in 2003, where it started with a small event in Ohio and then cascaded from one place to another until New York was totally black, and so on. what did we learn from that? Well, for one thing, we're constantly learning how to update our algorithms to deal with the data that describes the state of the grid. The other thing we're learning is that from events of the kind like the blackout, is that we have to island certain parts of the network so that if one goes out, it doesn't connect to others. And we started to do that. There's actually quite a bit of research that goes into that based upon observations of existing bad things. In the last couple of years, we've had in my neighborhood 2 hurricanes. It's actually with one of them, we were stuck in our street because the power lines came down. And we had no power in our house for a week. There is now a lot of discussion about planning for the next hurricane. Inevitably, we will have another one. And with respect to how you can predict which power lines will be damaged, and what are the damages that are possible. So, you have to clean the trees? Simple things like cleaning the trees that are above the lines, because it's the trees that fall down originally into the power lines. Or we've had some discussion on one of the speakers I've been talking about putting the power lines underground. And from the point of view of resilience of the system, putting them underground is actually a good idea. We've learned that it's just very expensive. So learning from events is actually very important.
Right, we need some data.
And hopefully we don't have too many events, so we don't have too much data.
Please, Sam.
Thank you. I wanted to make a quick response as I was invited to what very well said, and then make a comment about the issue of investment in data or analysis and the balance between those two things. In terms of knowing how data is being used, whether that's scientifically or in other things, the answer to that question is machine readable, permanent, and persistent identifiers. And in terms, so that those can be harvested, so that we can create another new data set about how those identifiers are being exposed and used on the net. It's easy to do. In principle, it's a social and economic thing because it requires the investment and the practices to do it. The market leader in terms of what we should be doing in terms of data sets are data site DOIs, digital object identifiers. And again, forgive me, but we'll plug the data citation workshop tomorrow morning when we'll be discussing some of those issues. I wanted to respond to with a comment and raise issue that Pavel mentioned about too much data being created, not sufficiently exploited, so that we need investment in analysis. Now, I'm not entirely going to disagree with that, but I want to nuance that statement a little bit. There's a very good book about data issues in general by Christine Wall of UCLA called Big Data, Small Data, and No Data. It's a fantastic book and it's a fantastic title, because it drills down into the practice and cultures of a number of different research areas to understand that there are research disciplines that are being drowned with data, but there are others which require increased investment to make the data sufficiently usable, and there are others which are necessarily still short of data and aren't measuring the right things for the science to add to data. So we need to have that nuanced assessment of the state of play, if you like, the data state of play for different disciplines. And the other point that I wanted to make is, as a necessary precondition to effective analysis. Effective analysis doesn't just mean investing in HPC, developing algorithms, etc. It also means effective curation and availability of the data that we are creating. That means data description, it means long-term preservation of those data, and it also means effective semantic enhancement. And without investment in those things, we are wasting a lot of money on data creation. But that doesn't mean that the data should be created. It means that we're not doing the job properly. We're not pushing the task to the end in order to make the data available and reusable. So there's a comment more than a statement of opinion rather than a question.
We have 5 minutes more. I invite questions or comments. 1 minute. Oh, sorry. Yeah, please, Alexander.
People talked about investment in this field, but nobody talked about the possibility to use the insurance system. Maybe there is a possibility to use this. I'm not specialist in this field, but maybe it's some regulators. I don't know. Always think about it.
Okay, other questions? Another lady, please.
Well, one of the important topics of this conference was the prediction of different phenomena, natural phenomena. And so, well, with the data growth, on the one hand, we can probably improve the predictions that we can make. But on the other hand, the data growth can lead to appearance of new predictions that can fail and that can bring additional chaos to the society. So my question is, what is your opinion? Is there any way to distinguish between predictable and unpredictable, at least in geosciences? Thank you.
Who's going to answer this principal question? Alexander, maybe you?
It's interesting dichotomy, which is predictable and that is non-predictable. I do not think that we can say now that this phenomenon could be predicted, and this field cannot be predicted. To me, it's maybe some strange way of thinking.
Yeah.
My feeling is that we have to have a critical thinking about data algorithm and results of our analysis. I think it's important, first of all, to analyze ourselves the results and with a critical eye and to be our own referee if we want to publish, and only thereafter to go on the market with the results. I think it's really very important to know exactly which data we use, or which signal really we try to find in this data, and thereafter to interpret this. I think it's our duty somehow, mainly when we speak about geohazard, to be careful and really to have this critical thinking on data.
Pavel, please, your comments.
Caravan, but also maybe a comment challenging another comment hopefully. If I think of a question from the physical sciences point of view, I think we have seen a remarkable increase in skills to forecast, to predict some phenomena. And a couple of us mentioned the short and medium term forecast, which was only possible by genuine combination of the physical principles and data assimilation, data taking into the process. So that was amazing. And I think we will see more of this better skills to predict in the future in many other fields, including geohazard tourism. But I think that where we really are not yet that very informed, or maybe I'm mistaken because I am not a social scientist, the predictability of the social systems. I would like to look to my colleague here, Haida, what she's from the field. I'm always wondering, how is it possible? How is it possible that we are so terribly bad in economic prediction? How is it possible? What is ruling that simple system, which is based on the 1850s Manchester Revolution century? We cannot answer it. So, how is that possible? And then, of course, my kind of intuition is because it's connected to humans. It's connected to the elasticity of the human mind. But anyway, I'm turning my nature and to hide it, to help me out here.
I'm afraid I can't follow. Too confident about that, but as I said, the rationality of human development, human behavior is one of the big challenges when we talk about integrating in social sciences.
So I don't know how to predict whether we'll be able to predict earthquakes or volcanic eruptions. But I do go back to Paul's talk when he talked about the development of our ability to predict the weather. When you think about what it was like even 10 years ago compared to now, where we have a pretty good track record of even going 10 days in advance and knowing what the weather is going to be. It's a dramatic change. You would think if you have some confidence in data science that we'll be able to do more with things that up until now have seemed hopeless. So I tend to be an optimist, but we have to be careful. One of the things we have to be most careful about is the quality of the data we put into our models. So we have to be able to develop good models, but the data, if it's not accurate, if it has errors in it, it's going to mislead us. And I think that's part of the problem with social sciences, because we just don't have accurate enough data about social processes.
Well, I think you know the answer to your own question. I suspect those people do as well. I mean, there are some things that we can predict with extreme precision. I mean, if I had access to my laptop, I could tell you precisely the time tomorrow morning the sun will rise. Equally, I could describe an experiment to determine the acceleration due to gravity to a particular place. That's one end of the spectrum. As we move to the other end, towards the other end, however, then as more components are involved, as the degrees of freedom increase, as the possibility of nonlinear reactions increases, where small differences in initial conditions can have a fundamental impact on the outcome, we recognize there is a spectrum. And indeed, at one end of the spectrum, we might say, one of the problems about humans is that actually the prediction itself is part of the system. So if someone tells me they predict tomorrow I will do this, I will rather carefully not do that. So actually, as we get towards the human end, you can't divorce the prediction from the human response. It's part of the game. But looking on the positive side, I've done a lot of work in seismology over the years. And say 40 years ago, then we used to think that something like, when we got seismic responses from the Earth, but something like 5 to 10% of the information coming back was signal, so-called, and the rest was noise. Now, at the fundamental level, there's no such thing as noise. It's just that's the bit we don't understand yet. And what's happened in seismology is that from the same sorts of sources, largely led by software manipulation, actually we can now say that something like 60% of the returns are signal, 40% noise. And Heidi referred, and I hate to disagree with that, but referred earlier to irrationality amongst people. I just wonder whether that's rather like the way in which we described noise in the past, where those parts of noise which have now become part of the signal. And what I suppose might be true is that as we understand, as we're able to do more experiments with people, and by that simply database experiments, knowledge-based experiments, not the record or hangings, that we might diminish the domain in which irrationality occurs. But I think gameplay is something that nature doesn't often do. Gameplay is inherent to humans. And although, as Albert Einstein said, God doesn't play dice, God might not, but humans do.
Thank you. I would like to add my answer to your question. When you asked Dr. Casapoca, who is sitting next to you, he wrote a paper, what is predictability, or something like that. So you have a possibility to discuss the point with you as well. Other questions? The last question, please. Professor Gierfan.
The question was the point. about predictability. So long as predictability distinguish between predictable and unpredictable patterns are well known in research science. Know that the atmospheric processes are fully unpredictable on time scales of days. So, in my opinion, it's very deep and very deep content in this question, because in my opinion, it's very, because in atmospheric science, it's important and well investigated question, but it's not investigated in, for example, in hydrogen, because predictable, because for some scales we can predict something, but we cannot predict for another scales. So I think that differences between predictable and unpredictable patterns is very, very important for geophysical science.
Okay, please, you raise to answer this panel. Yes.
I was just thinking, listening to this, and I would like to come back to your comment, Alex, like 20 minutes ago with Arrow. I can't, because it was exciting debate. When you said in a rather sad moment, you know, all these fantastic mathematicians, you are one of them, by the way, they've done so great job in trying to develop equations and solutions, and even finding analytical solutions to equations before this computers hit, and now we do it all numerically, etc., etc. You are right. But I would like to try to bring back a little bit more optimism to the life of mathematicians, because many of you are excellent mathematicians, applied or not applied physicists. I actually don't think that there is only place on this road next to the century for big data, for the pattern recognizing, learning, machine learning. You know, we are still believing in the equations which were developed by Newton. We have one equation for the relation of mass and one equation for dynamic. That's it. We are still discussing the applicability of those. I mean, I remember in the climatology, hydrology, there is the equation called Darcy equation, which was developed on the scale of the column, 1 square meter. And we have never solved the question, is it scalable to the regions, sections of the world? So I think that what I would like to challenge the mathematical minds amongst us, to help us apply that of engineers and numerical models to go back to the basics. Maybe there is something completely new. Maybe this Newtonian type of physics, which is governing, and then thermophysics and mass conservation physics, is not what we should be using in the next century. So I think there is a role for partnership. I would like to challenge the fundamental mathematicians to step out of their corners and to criticize heavily sometimes those who are now running that fast without the application we were discussing.
Thank you very much. And let me thank our panelists. You did a great job, as it should be during great debate. So our discussion is over. And I just give the floor to Raman, who will say a few words about how we will proceed with the publications of the results of this meeting, and then make some organizational announcement. So I would like to add, before I pass the floor to Raman, that in now less than an hour from now, at 7 o'clock, the gala dinner will start, and this is the event to which YASA invites us.
Dear colleagues,